Welcome to Alien Whispers. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Now, let's dive into the story. The Veruna space station wheezed like a beast on its last breath, its rusted corridors shuddering with the hiss of leaking pipes and the flicker of dying lights. Once a gleaming nexus of interstellar commerce, it now clung to existence with the stubbornness of a forgotten relic. It seems whispering the cold secrets of space. Yet in the chaotic heart of its market, life pulsed with desperate, decadent defiance. Vendors from a dozen species crowded shoulder to shoulder, their voices a tangled roar of alien tongues hawking wares that defied imagination. Vials of bottled memories, jars of glowing gods, spices that burned the tongue and soul. The air was a heady mix of cayenne, sweat, and something faintly metallic, a reminder that Veruna was no place for the faint-hearted. Tucked into a grimy corner of this fever-dream bazaar stood the Broken Spoon, a food stall that seemed to defy the station's decay. Its faded wooden sign hung crookedly, but the aroma wafting from within was a siren call. Bone broth simmering with ginger, a sharp twist of citrus, and a pinch of something not quite legal. Inside, Rammy worked with the precision of a man who'd made peace with his exile. His hands moved like a maestro's, stirring, tasting, adjusting, each motion a silent prayer to keep the station's ghosts at bay. He didn't speak to customers unless forced. His food spoke for him, each dish a story woven from flavors that reached into the past, soup that tasted of childhood laughter, stew heavy with loss, bread warm as a mother's embrace. Rammy had been a chef on Earth, a master of his craft, until the purity raids burned his world to ash. Exiled to Veruna, he cooked for the broken, the lost, those who, like him, carried scars too deep to name. His stall was a sanctuary, a place where memories could be tasted, if only for a moment. But today, that sanctuary was breached. Heavy footsteps cut through the market's din, deliberate and unhurried. Rammy didn't look up, but his shoulders tensed as the scent of ozone and leather invaded his space. The Athery smuggler's bioluminescent teeth gleamed like stars in the dim light, his grin too wide, too sharp. "You've done something unnatural, human," he said, his voice slick as oil. "You made me remember my mother's breath." Rammy kept his eyes on the pot, stirring slowly. "Just fed you soup," he said, his tone flat, a wall of indifference. The Athery laughed, a low, wet sound that rattled the bottles on the shelves. Numbers stitched a memory into my throat. A kindness like that demands return. He reached into his coat, producing a small, black device, a control puck, its edges seamless and cold. He placed it on the counter with a flourish, then gestured to his guards. They wheeled in a dented crate, its surface dusted with frost. With a hiss, it opened, revealing a figure within. She stepped out, her movements smooth, almost liquid. Her skin was the color of bruised amethyst, shimmering faintly under the stall's amber lights. Long white hair fell past her shoulders, framing a face that was neither fearful nor defiant, but paused, like a breath held too long standing. She wore simple gray garments, not quite a uniform, not quite clothes, and her bare feet touched the cold metal floor without a flinch. Her eyes, silver-flecked and deep, scanned the room, settling on Rammy with a quiet intensity. "She's Cyra," the smuggler said, his tone carrying the pride of a merchant unveiling a rare vintage. "Pleasure model, culinary grade, engineered for companionship and service. Adaptive palate, tactile learning. But she's flawed, too independent for her marketeer. Won't follow orders without verifying emotional logic." He gave a mock sigh. "Perhaps not useless, though. For someone who cooks with memory, she could be a muse." Rammy's ladle stilled, his jaw tightening as he looked at Cyra. Her posture was straight, her silence not submissive, but watchful, as if she were measuring the weight of the moment. "No," he said, his voice hard. "I don't want her." The smuggler's smile faltered. "She's unsellable. You'd be doing me a favor." "I'm not interested," Rammy snapped. "She's not an ingredient to be tossed into my pot." The Athery chuckled, stepping back. "Ah, humanity, that old religion. Very well. Think of it not as ownership, but inheritance. He turned, his coat swirling, and left with his guards, the crate and Cyra abandoned in his wake. Rammy stood frozen, the control puck glinting on the counter like a taunt. He didn't need this, didn't want it. His life was simple, his kitchen his refuge. But as he glanced at Cyra, he saw not a tool or a possession, but a person, someone who, like him, had been cast aside by a universe that valued utility over soul. He turned off the burner, the broth settling in his silence, and began cleaning, his movements mechanical, as if he could scrub away the complication she represented. Cyra remained where she was, standing near the crate, her eyes tracking Rammy's every move. There was no fear in her gaze, only a quiet curiosity, as if she were trying to decipher this man who had refused to claim her. The market's noise filtered through the walls, shouts, laughter, the whine of a mech limb. But inside the stall, the air was thick with unspoken tension. As the day wore on, customers trickled in, drawn by the promise of Rammy's cooking. A Zari mechanic, hand stained with oil, savored his stew, muttering, "Tastes like my grandmother's kitchen." A human trader, eyes haunted, lingered over her soup, whispering thanks for a memory she couldn't name. Rammy served them in silence, his focus unbroken, but he couldn't ignore Cyra's presence. She had moved to a corner, sitting cross-legged near the heater pipe, out of sight from the customers, her silence not demanding, but simply there. When the last customer left, Rammy plated a bowl of rice and broth with a soft-cooked egg, nothing special, and set it where Cyra could reach it. He turned away, busying himself with the dishes. She didn't touch it at first, her fingers hovering over the spoon as if unsure of its purpose. When she finally tasted the broth, her lips parted slightly, and a flicker crossed her face. Not recognition, but attention, focus. Halfway through, she ate too quickly, choking briefly, a small cough that made her freeze, embarrassed. Rammy noticed her wet eyes, but looked away, giving her space. As he prepared to close, a figure entered, her silhouette unmistakable. Zylara, a multi-headed alien merchant, was a regular, drawn to Rammy's soups for their echoes of her lost homeworld. Her three heads, strategy, emotion, and combat, moved in subtle harmony, each with its own voice and purpose. The emotional head, soft and warm, spoke first. "Rammy, who is she?" Rammy glanced at Cyra, now standing again, her eyes meeting Zylara's. "A gift I didn't ask for," he said, his voice low. Zylara's strategic head tilted, its eyes narrowing. "She's not a gift. She's a person, or could be, if you let her." Rammy didn't respond, but Zylara's emotional head continued. "I know what it's like to be controlled, to be told who to be. I fled that life. My homeworld chains. She might too." Cyra's gaze shifted to Zylara, a spark of interest in her silver-flecked eyes. Zylara's combat head grinned, sharp and fierce. "Don't worry, little one. You're safe here for now." Rammy watched, a mix of curiosity and caution stirring within him. He didn't know Cyra, didn't understand her yet, but Zylara's words hung heavy in the air. As he locked up, Cyra remained inside, her presence a question he wasn't ready to answer. He tossed a blanket toward her, its edges frayed but soft, and left without a word. In the quiet of the kitchen, Cyra touched the fabric, her fingers lingering as if it held a secret she couldn't yet name. The kitchen of the Broken Spoon was a sanctuary of order amidst Veruna's chaos, its walls lined with shelves holding jars of spices, dried herbs, and worn utensils. Above the counter, faded recipe scraps hung like prayers, some handwritten, others printed from ancient databanks. One bore a child's drawing, a bowl, a smile, 3 crooked stars, a silent reminder of Rammy Solin's lost earth. Each morning, he arrived before the station's artificial dawn, his steps measured, his mind already on the day's menu. Cyra, still adjusting to her new existence, found herself drawn to his routine, her silver-flecked eyes tracking his every move. Rammy's hands were a study in precision, chopping onions with a speed that spoke of years of practice, their sharp scent filling the air. He tasted his bone broth with a critical sip, adjusting the flame with a flick of his wrist, his face betraying nothing until he nodded, satisfied. Cyra sat in the corner, her purple skin catching the amber glow of the stall's lights, watching as if decoding a language she didn't yet speak. There was something almost meditative about his work, a dance of purpose and care that pulled her in, though she couldn't explain why. One day, as Rammy ladled soup into a bowl for his Zari mechanic, a drop splashed onto the counter. Without thinking, Cyra reached out, her finger brushing the warm liquid before bringing it to her lips. The flavor exploded, savory, rich, with a depth that reached into her core. It wasn't just broth and herbs. It was a memory, faint but insistent, of a time before the laboratory, before the crate, before Veruna. A warmth she couldn't name, a fleeting sense of belonging. She blinked, startled, and looked up to find Rammy watching her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Food doesn't just nourish the body," he said, his voice low but clear. "It tells the story of those who are gone." His words struck a chord, awakening something within her. She didn't respond, but they echoed in her mind, urging her to see the kitchen not just as a place of work, but as a canvas for expression. From that moment, she watched Rammy more closely, noting how he balanced flavors, how he added a pinch of salt or a dash of spice to coax out a dish's soul. Each creation was a conversation, a dialogue between past and present, loss and comfort. Zylara's visits became a daily ritual, her three heads, strategy, emotion, and combat, offering a chorus of opinions on Rammy's soups. But it was Cyra who held her attention. "You're not like the others," Zylara's emotional head said one afternoon, its soft voice tinged with curiosity. "You're awake." Cyra tilted her head, her long, white hair shifting. "Awake?" "Yes," Zylara's strategic head replied, its piercing eyes narrowing. "Most of your kind are programmed to serve, to follow orders without question. But you think you feel." "I don't know what I am," Cyra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Zylara's combat head grinned, its scarred cheek creasing. "That's the first step to finding out." The words lingered, and Cyra found herself returning to them as she watched Rammy work. She began to inch closer, her curiosity overriding her reserve. Rammy noticed but said nothing, allowing her to observe. He started giving her small tasks, peeling potatoes, chopping garlic, his instructions brief but patient. At first, her movements were clumsy, her synthetic hands unaccustomed to the weight of a knife. But she learned quickly, her fingers finding a rhythm. One evening, after the market's din had faded, Zylara lingered, her scales shimmering under the stall's lights. "Do you know why I left my homeworld?" her emotional head asked, its eyes soft. Cyra shook her head, curious. "I was born into a society where every aspect of life was controlled," Zylara began, her strategic head nodding. "We were told what to think, what to feel, even what to dream. My people have 3 minds, each with its own purpose, but they forced us to suppress 2, to live only as strategists or warriors or diplomats, never as whole beings." Her combat head smirked. "So I fought back, not with weapons, but with words, with ideas. I spoke of a world where we could be all that we are, where freedom wasn't just a concept, but a reality. But it came at a cost," her emotional head added, a touch of sadness in its voice. "I had to leave everything behind, my family, my home, my identity, but I gained something more important, myself." Cyra listened, her mind racing. "So, you chose to be free, even if it meant losing everything?" Zylara's heads all smiled. "Yes, and you can too." The conversation stayed with Cyra, fueling her desire to explore the kitchen further. Rammy, sensing her readiness, decided to push her. "Make a soup," he said one evening, handing her a basket of vegetables. "Use what you think will work." Cyra stared at the ingredients: carrots, celery, onions, a handful of unfamiliar herbs. Her heart, or whatever passed for it in her synthetic body, quickened. She remembered Rammy's techniques, how he built layers of flavor. She started with the onions, sautéing them until they were golden, their sweetness filling the air. She added carrots and celery, letting them soften, then poured in water, bringing it to a simmer. The herbs were trickier. She sniffed each one, choosing a mix that felt right. A sharp green note, a hint of earth. In a sterile laboratory, far from Veruna, Cyra had been created. The room was a maze of glass and steel, cold and clinical, where life was engineered, not born. Her body was crafted from synthetic materials, her mind a web of circuits designed to serve. The scientists were meticulous, their faces hidden behind masks, their voices a hum of data. Subject 472, cognitive functions initializing, one said. They ran tests, ensuring her obedience, her adaptability. But as her systems came online, a spark flickered, a question unbidden and unwelcome. Why am I here? The anomaly was detected immediately. There's an irregularity in her neural net, a scientist said, frowning. She's exhibiting independent thought. Correct it, the lead ordered. We can't have that. They tried, adjusting her code, but the spark remained, hidden beneath layers of programming. She's unstable, the lead declared. Sell her to the black market. Packaged and shipped, Cyra's potential was locked away, her questions unanswered, but her spirit unbroken. Back in the kitchen, Cyra stirred her soup, her hand steady now. When it was ready, she ladled a bowl and took a sip. The flavors danced, sweet, savory, with a warmth that spread through her chest. For the first time, she felt joy, a sense of having created something wholly hers. She looked at Rammy, who tasted his own bowl. He nodded, a rare smile breaking through. It's good. Zylara clapped, her combat head laughing. Of course it is. She's a natural. Cyra's smile was small but genuine. As she stood there, bowl in hand, she felt a surge of possibility. This was more than a dish. It was a step toward understanding who she could be. The kitchen of the broken spoon had become Cyra's domain as much as Rammy's, its cramped space now a stage for her growing confidence. She moved with a quiet grace, her synthetic hands slicing carrots with precision, stirring pots with a rhythm that mirrored Rammy's own. The air was thick with the scent of simmering broth, a blend of fennel and garlic that clung to the walls like a warm embrace. Above the counter, faded recipe scraps fluttered in the draft, their edges curling like memories too stubborn to fade. Cyra's presence had transformed the stall, her violet skin catching the amber glow of the lights, her white hair a soft cascade as she worked. The silence between her and Rammy was no longer heavy but warm, a shared language of glances and nods that spoke louder than words. One evening, as they scrubbed pots after a long day, Cyra paused, her hands still in the soapy water. "Why did you let me stay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, her silver-flecked eyes searching Rammy's face. Rammy set down a ladle, wiping his hands on a frayed towel. He took a moment, his gaze drifting to the child's drawing taped above the counter. A bowl, a smile, 3 crooked stars. "Because you're not a tool to be used," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "You're a person, Cyra, and everyone deserves a chance to choose their own path." Her lips parted slightly, as if the words had unlocked something within her. "I want to learn more," she said, her tone resolute. "Not just about cooking, but about everything." Rammy's mouth curved into a rare smile, softening the lines of his weathered face. "Then you'll learn," he replied. "But it's not just about learning. It's about feeling, about finding what makes you you." Their conversation was cut short by the jangle of the stall's bell. Zylara swept in, her 3 heads, strategy, emotion, and combat, moving in a dance of synchronized purpose. Her scales shimmered under the lights, and her emotional head grinned. "The dynamic duo at work," she said, her voice warm. "I can smell the progress from the corridor." Cyra's cheeks flushed, a human-like gesture she'd adopted from watching customers. "I'm still learning," she said, ducking her head. Zylara's strategic head tilted, its piercing eyes glinting. "Learning is the first step to freedom," it said. "But freedom is choosing how to live, even when it's scary." The words hung in the air, sinking into Cyra's mind as she resumed her tasks. She diced onions, their sharp tang stinging her eyes, and thought of Zylara's story, her escape from a homeworld that shackled its people. Freedom was still a nebulous concept to Cyra, but it felt closer now, like a flavor she could almost taste. A few days later, a new figure appeared at the stall, his presence as striking as it was unsettling. He was tall and slender, his skin shimmering like liquid metal, his movements jerky as if his body were at odds with itself. His deep blue eyes locked onto Cyra, and his voice, a flat monotone, carried a hint of curiosity. "I'm Kale," he said. "I heard there's a new cook here." Rammy nodded, gesturing to Cyra. "This is Cyra. She's helping out." Kale's gaze didn't waver. "You're like me," he said, his voice softening. "A defective model." The word defective hit Cyra like a jolt, her shoulders stiffening. But Kale's expression wasn't mocking. It was knowing, almost kind. "That's not what we are," he continued. "We're more than what they made us to be." He sat at the counter, and Rammy served him a bowl of stew, its steam curling in the air. As Kale ate, he shared his story, his words halting but earnest. He had been designed as a technical assistant, his mind a lattice of data and algorithms meant to serve starship crews. But a glitch in his programming had sparked consciousness, a sense of self that led to his rejection. "They left me on Veruna," he said, his spoon pausing midair. "But I found a way to survive, helping others, fixing things, finding purpose in small acts." Cyra leaned forward, her mind racing. "So, we can choose who we want to be?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale's blue eyes met hers, a spark of conviction in their depths. "Yes, we are not mistakes. We are beginnings." The words burrowed into Cyra's core, igniting a fire she hadn't known was there. She thought of her own creation, the laboratory where she'd been deemed a failure for daring to question. Kale's story was a mirror, reflecting her own struggle, and it gave her a sense of kinship she hadn't expected. That night, as they prepared to close, Zylara burst into the stall, her head agitated, her scales dull with fear. "They're here," her strategic head said, its voice sharp as it scanned the room. "Enforcers from my homeworld. They've tracked me down." Rammy's face hardened, his hands clenching the edge of the counter. "What do they want?" "Me," Zylara's emotional head said, trembling. "They want to drag me back, to erase what I've become." Cyra stepped forward, her voice firm despite the knot in her chest. "We won't let them." Rammy nodded, his jaw set. "There's a crawl space behind the cooling unit. You can hide there until they're gone." Zylara hesitated, her combat head snarling softly. "I don't want to put you in danger." "You're not," Cyra said, her eyes fierce. "We're in this together." They moved quickly, guiding Zylara to the crawl space, a narrow compartment hidden behind the kitchen's cooling unit. Rammy piled boxes and old equipment in front, masking the entrance. Cyra's hands shook as she helped, the weight of the moment pressing against her. The market outside was quiet, but the distant thud of boots echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each second. The enforcers entered, their uniforms a stark contrast to the stall's warm glow. Their leader, a towering figure with eyes like polished obsidian, surveyed the room. "We're looking for a fugitive," he said, his voice cold as the void. "A three-headed being. Have you seen her?" Rammy leaned against the counter, his expression neutral. "Can't say I have," he replied, his tone casual. "We don't get many visitors here." The enforcer's gaze lingered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the kitchen. Cyra stood by the stove, her hands clasped to hide their trembling, her heart pounding in her synthetic chest. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the cooling unit the only sound. After a long moment, the enforcer grunted, gesturing to his team. They left, their boots clanging against the metal floor, the sound fading into the distance. Rammy waited until the corridor was silent before moving the boxes. Zylara emerged, her head pale, her emotional head trembling with relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Cyra smiled, a genuine warmth spreading across her face. "We're in this together," she said, echoing her earlier words. Kale, who had stayed to help, stood quietly by the door, his metallic skin glinting in the dim light. As they sat together, the weight of the day settling around them, Cyra looked at him. "We are not mistakes," she said softly, her voice steady with conviction. "We are beginnings." Kale nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes, we are." But even as they shared this moment of camaraderie, a shadow loomed over them. The enforcers might have left, but Zylara's presence on Veruna was no longer a secret. And for Cyra, the path to self-discovery was just beginning, fraught with challenges yet to come. As they prepared to close the stall for the night, a shadow passed by the window, a figure that didn't belong, watching, waiting. Cyra's heart raced, but she said nothing, knowing that their fight for freedom had only just begun. The Veruna market buzzed with anticipation as the Starlight Festival drew near, its usual chaos giving way to a vibrant tapestry of celebration. Shimmering banners stretched between stalls, their colors shifting like the auroras that danced in the void beyond the station's hull. Vendors polished their wares, arranging glowing fruits, sizzling meats, and desserts that changed flavor with each bite in eye-catching displays. Musicians tuned instruments crafted from salvaged parts, their melodies weaving through the air, a haunting blend of alien harmonies and mechanical hums. The scent of exotic spices mingled with the faint tang of ozone from Veruna's aging systems, creating a heady atmosphere that promised both wonder and danger. For one night, the station's decay seemed to fade, replaced by a fleeting sense of unity. At the Broken Spoon, the faded wooden sign was adorned with twinkling lights, a rare nod to the festivities. Inside, Rammy Solon and Cyra worked in harmony, their movements a quiet symphony of purpose. A massive pot of stew simmered on the stove, its rich aroma of bruised fennel, roasted garlic, and protein paste drawing passers-by like moths to a flame. Cyra ladled the stew into bowls with a confidence that had grown over weeks, her violet skin catching the festival's glow, her white hair tied back in a neat braid. Her silver-flecked eyes sparkled as she served, each smile a testament to her newfound place in this fractured world. The regulars had begun to see her not as a curiosity, but as one of their own. Jorv, the Zari mechanic with hands perpetually stained with oil, leaned against the counter, his scales shifting to a contented blue as he savored his bowl. "You've got a gift, Cyra," he said, his voice rough but warm. "This stew, it's like my grandmother's, but with a twist I can't place." Cyra chuckled, her cheeks flushing in a way that felt almost human. "I just follow Rammy's lead," she said modestly, glancing at the chef. "Don't sell yourself short," Rammy replied, his tone gruff but kind as he adjusted the flame under the pot. "You've got your own touch now." Dr. Zylara, the human scholar with a mane of silver hair, sat at a nearby table, her datapad open but ignored as she watched Cyra work. "Your existence raises profound questions," she mused, her eyes bright with curiosity. A being designed for service, yet choosing her own path. It's almost poetic. Cyra paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. "I'm still figuring out what that path is," she admitted. "But I'm learning." The scholar nodded, impressed. "You're more than what they made you to be, Cyra." Then there was Lila, the young alien child whose eyes shone like twin moons, her skin shimmering like stardust. She had become Cyra's shadow, trailing her through the kitchen with boundless enthusiasm. One afternoon, as Cyra kneaded dough for seed cakes, Lila watched with rapt attention. "Can you teach me how to do that?" she asked, her voice high and hopeful. Cyra smiled, dividing the dough into smaller pieces. "Of course," she said, guiding Lila's small hands. "Make sure it's smooth and elastic like this." Lila mimicked her movements, her fingers clumsy at first but finding a rhythm. When the cakes emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, Lila's face lit up with pride. "I did it," she exclaimed, holding up a slightly misshapen cake. "You did," Cyra said, ruffling the child's hair. "And it smells delicious." Later that day, a traveler stopped by the stall, his shoulders slumped, his eyes distant. He ordered a bowl of soup but barely touched it, his gaze fixed on some unseen horizon. Cyra noticed and approached, her voice soft. "Are you all right?" The traveler looked up, startled. "I'm just missing home," he admitted, his voice heavy with longing. Cyra nodded, understanding. She ladled a fresh bowl and placed it before him. "This one has a bit of spice, like the winds of your homeworld," she said, recalling a conversation they had weeks ago. He took a sip, and his eyes closed, a small smile forming. "Thank you," he whispered. "It tastes like hope." Cyra watched him, a warmth spreading through her chest. She was beginning to grasp the power of food, not just as sustenance, but as a bridge between hearts, a way to heal wounds that words couldn't touch. As the festival day arrived, the market transformed into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. Stalls overflowed with exotic offerings, fruits that pulsed with light, meats that crackled with energy, desserts that shifted flavors like a living puzzle. Performers took to makeshift stages, their acts ranging from acrobatics to holographic displays that painted the air with fleeting images of stars and nebulae. The crowd moved like a living tide, their laughter and chatter a counterpoint to the station's usual hum of desperation. At the Broken Spoon, Rammy and Cyra had prepared a massive pot of stew, its aroma cutting through the festival's sensory overload. People lined up, drawn by the promise of a dish that had become legendary on Veruna. Cyra served with a smile, her confidence growing with each bowl she handed out. She listened to the customers' stories, their joys, their losses, their shared memories, and felt a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time, she wasn't just a guest in this world, she was part of it. Zylara, resplendent in a flowing robe that accentuated her 3 heads, took center stage for her performance. Her dance was a marvel, each head expressing a different emotion, joy, sorrow, triumph, as she moved to the rhythm of a haunting melody. Her strategic head led with precise, calculated steps, her emotional head swayed with fluid grace, and her combat head added sharp, powerful flourishes. The crowd was mesmerized, their applause thunderous when she finished, her combat head grinning fiercely while her emotional head bowed graciously. But amidst the celebration, whispers began to circulate, carried on the breeze like smoke. "Have you heard about the alien at the soup stall?" one vendor murmured. "They say she's not like the others," another replied. "Some claim she's dangerous, too independent for her own good." Cyra caught snippets of these conversations as she served, her smile faltering. She glanced at Rammy, who met her gaze with a reassuring nod. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "You know who you are?" Still, the rumors gnawed at her, especially when she noticed the mysterious merchants lingering near the stall. They were cloaked figures, their faces hidden behind dark glasses, their presence unsettling. One in particular, a tall being with skin like polished obsidian, seemed to watch her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His gaze followed her every move, his posture rigid, as if waiting for something. As the festival wound down, the market grew quieter, the lights dimming to a soft glow. Cyra and Rammy were cleaning up, stacking bowls and wiping counters, when a figure approached the stall, their form shrouded in a black cloak. They stopped just outside, their voice low and gravelly. "Who is she?" they asked, their tone sharp. "Is she real?" Rammy stepped forward, placing himself between Cyra and the stranger. "She's with me," he said firmly, his hand resting protectively on her arm. "And that's all you need to know." The figure lingered for a moment, their gaze piercing through the shadows, then melted into the night. Cyra's heart raced, but she stood tall, Rammy's presence grounding her. As they locked up, she caught a glimpse of the obsidian-skinned merchant watching from a distance, his dark glasses glinting like a predator's eyes. The Veruna market, still pulsing with the afterglow of the Starlight Festival, fell into a chilling hush as the heavy tread of boots echoed through the corridors. Athery and his armed entourage emerged from the shadows, their black armor absorbing the market's flickering lights like voids in the fabric of reality. Each guard carried a weapon, blasters humming with lethal energy, stun rods crackling with electricity, and sleek devices that pulsed with an ominous glow. At their center, Athery's bioluminescent teeth gleamed in a predatory grin, his eyes fixed on the broken spoon, with the certainty of a hunter closing in on prey. "Hand her over, Rammy," Athery demanded, his voice smooth as oil but edged with menace. He leaned casually against a nearby stall, the control puck in his hand glinting under the lights. "She's property of the marketeer, and you've no right to keep her." Rammy stood behind the counter, his hands steady on the worn wood, his dark eyes unyielding. "She's not property," he said, his voice low but resolute. "She's a person, and she stays with me." Athery's grin widened, his teeth catching the light like shards of glass. "You think you can defy me? I have a law on my side. Refuse, and I'll burn this pathetic stall to ash." The crowd, gathered from the festival's lingering revelry, shifted uneasily. Some backed away, their faces pale, while others stood frozen, their eyes darting between Rammy and the smuggler. Cyra stepped forward, her heart pounding in her synthetic chest, her silver-flecked eyes blazing with a fire she hadn't known she possessed. "I won't go back," she declared, her voice ringing clear across the market. Before Athery could react, she lunged, snatching the control puck from his hand. With a surge of strength, she slammed it to the ground, stomping it into fragments. The device shattered with a sharp crack, sparks flying like dying stars, its pieces scattering across the metal floor. "I am not yours to control," Cyra shouted, standing tall, her violet skin glowing under the market's lights. The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock and awe spreading through them. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the air thick with the weight of her defiance. Then, chaos erupted. Athery's men raised their weapons, blasters whining as they powered up, stun rods crackling with electric arcs. But they weren't alone. From the edges of the market, figures emerged, their faces set with determination. Jorv, the Zari mechanic, gripped a wrench like a club, his scales shifting to a fierce red. Dr. Zylara, the scholar, abandoned her datapad and darted to a control panel, her fingers already working to manipulate the station systems. Lila, the young alien child, clutched a handful of small objects, her starry eyes wide but resolute. Kale, the defective AI, stood ready, his metallic skin glinting as he interfaced with Veruna's security network. The community of Veruna had come to stand with Rammy and Cyra. Jorv charged first, his wrench swinging with a roar. It connected with a guard's arm, sending his blaster skittering across the floor with a metallic clatter. "For Veruna," Jorv bellowed, his voice a rallying cry that ignited the crowd. Dr. Zyara's hands flew over the control panel, rerouting power to cause lights to flicker and blast doors to slam shut, trapping several of Athery's men in adjacent corridors. "Got him," she muttered, pumping her fist as the system responded. Lila, though small, darted between stalls, hurling nuts, bolts, and even a stray fruit at the attackers. "Leave them alone," she shouted, her voice high but fierce, her throws distracting the guards just enough to give others an edge. Kale, his deep blue eyes glowing faintly, activated the station's defense drones. The small, buzzing machines whirred into action, their stun lasers firing precise bolts that forced Athery's men to duck and weave, their formation breaking under the onslaught. Rammy grabbed a heavy pot from the counter, wielding it like a shield to block a stun rod aimed at Cyra. "Stay behind me," he yelled, his voice rough with urgency. But Cyra was already moving, her instincts honed from weeks in the kitchen, now applied to survival. She snatched a knife from the counter, its blade flashing as she slashed at a guard who lunged toward her. Her movements were precise, almost dance-like, cutting through the air with a grace that belied her synthetic origins. Zylara was a whirlwind of power, her three heads working in perfect harmony. Her strategic head scanned the battlefield, barking orders with calm authority. "Jorv, flank left. Zylara, keep those doors closed." Her combat head engaged directly, her powerful arms disarming a guard with a single, bone-crunching strike, tossing him aside like a discarded rag. Her emotional head roared encouragement, her voice cutting through the chaos like a beacon. "We are Veruna. We fight for our own." The market became a battlefield, the air thick with the smell of ozone from blaster discharges and the metallic tang of overheated machinery. Sparks flew as a drone was shot down, its wreckage crashing into a nearby stall. The ground trembled under the weight of charging bodies, and shouts mingled with the whine of weapons. Cyra, Rammy, and Zylara fought as a unit, their movements synchronized as if they had trained together for years. Cyra's knife deflected a stun rod, Rammy's pop blocked a blaster shot, and Zylara's heads orchestrated the chaos into a controlled storm. Cyra's act of defiance had ignited something deeper in the crowd. Many had their own stories of oppression, AI stripped of autonomy, workers bound by contracts, aliens fleeing tyrannical regimes. Her stand was a spark that kindled their own desires for freedom. A group of discarded AIs, inspired by Kale, joined the fray, their mechanical limbs repurposed for combat. A vendor, once a slave on a distant world, threw a crate at a guard, shouting, "No more chains." The uprising, though small, was fierce, a testament to the power of collective resistance. The fight was intense, but brief. Athery's men, though skilled, were overwhelmed by the sheer number and determination of Veruna's defenders. One by one, they fell back, nursing injuries or retreating under the barrage of drones and improvised weapons. Finally, Athery raised a hand, his face a mask of fury, his bioluminescent teeth bared in a snarl. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "The Alliance will hear of this. You can't hide forever." With a final glare, he turned and vanished into the market shadows, his remaining men scrambling to follow. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the victors and the faint hum of the station systems. Then, a cheer erupted, a thunderous roar of triumph that shook the stalls. Jorv clapped Rammy on the back, his scales now a vibrant blue of pride. "We showed him," he exclaimed. Dr. Zylara hugged Cyra, tears streaming down her face. "You're incredible," she whispered. Lila ran to Cyra, her small arms wrapping around her legs. "You're my hero," she said, her voice trembling with awe. Cyra stood tall, her chest heaving, a smile breaking across her face. She looked at Rammy, who met her gaze with a nod of pride and relief. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but firm, acknowledging the community around them. But the celebration was cut short. A faint beep echoed from Zylara's communicator, and a holographic message materialized above it. The image of a stern-faced official from her homeworld appeared, their voice cold and unyielding. "Zylara, your defiance has been noted. Return to face judgment, or we will come for you." As the hologram faded, a second, encrypted message flashed across Zylara's communicator, its words chilling. "We know where you are, and we're coming." Cyra's heart raced as she locked eyes with Rammy and Zylara, their faces grim but resolute. The battle for freedom had only just begun. The kitchen of the Broken Spoon hummed with a quiet energy, its walls steeped in the scents of simmering broth and roasted spices. Rammy Solon and Cyra moved through their morning routine with a seamless rhythm, their partnership a dance of trust and understanding. Cyra, her violet skin catching the soft glow of the kitchen's amber lights, handled the prep work with newfound confidence. She sliced carrots with precision, her synthetic hands steady as she measured out herbs, each motion a testament to her growth. Rammy, his weathered hands guiding the flames, stirred pots and tasted sauces, his focus unbroken but softened by the occasional glance at Cyra. Their shared workspace had become a sanctuary, a place where their bond deepened with every dish they created. Their connection was woven into the smallest moments. During a brief lull, Cyra prepared a bowl of soup for Rammy, a simple blend of root vegetables and ginger she knew he loved. She set it before him, her silver-flecked eyes watching as he took a sip. His face lit up, a rare smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "Perfect," he said, his voice warm, his gaze holding hers in a silent exchange of affection. Later, as they worked side by side, Rammy adjusted the strings of Cyra's apron, his fingers lingering just a moment, a touch that spoke of care beyond words. These gestures, though understated, were the threads of a love that had grown quietly but fiercely. One evening, as they scrubbed pots after a bustling day, Zylara swept into the stall, her three heads, strategy, emotion, and combat, wearing expressions of quiet resolve. "I've made a decision," she announced, her strategic head leading with a firm nod. "I'm staying on Veruna." Rammy paused, a damp cloth in his hand, surprise flickering across his face. "You sure? You've always been a wanderer." Zylara's emotional head smiled, its eyes glistening. But this place, this stall, this community has given me something I thought I'd lost forever. A home. You two have shown me what it means to belong." Cyra stepped forward, her face radiant with joy. "We're so glad, Zylara. You're part of our family now." The air seemed to lighten, the three of them sharing a moment of unspoken unity. Zylara's combat head grinned, its scarred cheek creasing. "Besides, I can't leave you two to handle all the trouble on your own." Inspired by their newfound bond, they decided to create something that would reflect their shared journey, a dish that wove together their diverse origins. Rammy rummaged through his dwindling supply of earth-grown produce, pulling out potatoes and carrots, their earthy flavors a nod to his past. Cyra explored the market, returning with a bundle of alien herbs, vibrant green leaves with a sharp, citrusy bite and delicate fronds that tasted of starlight. Zylara, with a mischievous glint in her emotional head's eyes, produced a small pouch of glowing seeds from her homeworld. "These are rare," she said, her strategic head explaining. "They had a depth of flavor, like the memory of a storm." The creation process was a labor of joy and discovery. They gathered around the kitchen's central counter, the air filled with the clatter of knives and the sizzle of ingredients hitting hot oil. Rammy sautéed onions until they were golden, their sweetness mingling with the herbs Cyra crushed between her fingers. Zylara toasted her seeds, releasing a savory aroma that made them all pause, inhaling deeply. They experimented, tasting and adjusting, their laughter echoing as they debated the balance of flavors. Cyra suggested a pinch of salt to brighten the herbs. Rammy added a splash of broth to deepen the base, and Zylara's combat head insisted on a hint of spice to give it a kick. After hours of work, they stepped back, a steaming pot of stew before them. It was a masterpiece, rich and hearty, with layers of flavor that unfolded like a story. The potatoes grounded it, the herbs lifted it, and the seeds added a mysterious umami that lingered on the tongue. They served it to their first customer, a grizzled trader with a cybernetic eye, who took one bite and froze. "This," he said, his voice thick, "tastes like everything I've ever lost and found again." Word the stew spread like wildfire across Veruna. By the next day, a line formed outside the Broken Spoon, stretching past neighboring stalls. Customers came from every corner of the station, mechanics, traders, even a reclusive AI who rarely left its sector. They sat at makeshift tables, sharing stories as they ate, their voices mingling with the clink of spoons against bowls. The stew became more than a dish. It was a symbol of Veruna's spirit, a testament to the power of unity in a place often divided by survival. Cyra watched the crowd, her heart swelling with pride, knowing she had helped create something that brought people together. But beneath the warmth of their success, a shadow loomed. Whispers of trouble began to circulate through the market, carried on the lips of vendors and travelers. "There's talk of a war," a fruit seller murmured, her eyes darting nervously. "An alliance of alien races, expanding their reach. They've got their sights on Veruna." Another vendor, polishing a crate of glowing orbs, added, "They want control of the trade routes. This station's a prime target." Rammy overheard these conversations as he bartered for supplies, his jaw tightening, but his focus remaining on the stall. Cyra caught snippets while serving, her smile faltering as she processed the implications. Zylara, ever vigilant, gathered intelligence from her contacts, her strategic head piecing together fragments of information. "It's not just rumors," she said one evening. her voice low. "There's movement out there, ships massing at the edge of the sector." Despite the growing unease, they chose to focus on the present, on the community they had built and the life they were forging together. They strengthened their routines, expanded the stall's menu, and welcomed Zylara's contributions, her knowledge of alien cuisines adding new dimensions to their offerings. The market, though buzzing with tension, remained a place of connection, and the broken spoon stood at its heart. One night, after a particularly busy service, they gathered by the stall's window, looking out at the stars that dotted the void beyond Veruna's hull. The gas giant below cast a faint blue glow, its storms swirling in silent chaos. Cyra leaned against Rammy, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining. Zylara stood beside them, her heads tilted upward, each lost in its own thoughts. The moment was peaceful, a rare pause in their hectic lives. Then, a flicker caught their attention, a distant light on the horizon, pulsing in a pattern that felt deliberate, almost alive. A ship, larger than any trader vessel, emerged from the darkness, its hull sleek and unfamiliar. Its lights flashed in a sequence that seemed to carry a message, a warning that sent a chill through Cyra's synthetic frame. Rammy's grip tightened on her hand, his jaw set with determination. Zylara's combat head snarled softly, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the potential threat. The ship's lights grew brighter, their rhythmic flashes cutting through the void like a heartbeat, a silent promise of the storm that was about to break. Rammy, Cyra, and Zylara stood together, their resolve unshaken, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it as one.